Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Hazrat Inayat Khan. The Alchemy of Happiness. Stages on the path of self-realization. We see that in the words of philosophers, mystics, sages, thinkers, and prophets, great importance is given to self-realization. If I were to explain what self-realization is, I would say that the first step to self-realization is God realization. The one who realizes God in the end realizes self, but the one who realizes self never realizes God. And that is the difficulty today with those who search after spiritual truth intellectually. They read many books about occultism, esotericism, and mysticism. And what they find most emphasized is self-realization. Then they think that what they have to do is to attain that self-realization, and that they can just as well omit God. But in reality, God is the key to spiritual perfection. God is the stepping stone to self-realization. God is the way which extends over the knowledge of the whole of creation. And if God is omitted, then nothing can be reached. There is a wrong method in use today in many so-called cults, which often proves to be a failure, and which consists in teaching the beginner on the spiritual path to say, "I am God." A thoughtless phrase, a word of insolence, a thought which has no foundation. It leads him nowhere except to ignorance. To the prophets and thinkers, to the sages who taught their followers the ideal of God, it had a meaning, a purpose. But today people do not recognize these, and being anxious to find a shortcut, they omit the principal thing in order to come to the realization of self. Once a man went to a Chinese sage and said to him, "I want to learn the occult laws. Will you teach me?" The sage said, "You have come to ask me to teach you something, but we have so many missionaries in China who come to teach us." The man said, "We know about God, but I have come to you to ask you about occult laws." The sage said, "If you know about God, you don't need to know anything more. God is all that is to be known. If you know Him, you know all." In this world of commercialism, there is a tendency, an unconscious tendency, even for a person who wants to promote the spiritual truth, to cater for the taste of the people. Either because of a commercial instinct, or with the desire to have a success, there is a tendency to cater for what people want. If people seem to be tired of the God ideal, those who have that tendency want to give them occultism. They call it that or mysticism, because the God ideal seems so simple. And as there is a fashion in everything, there is even a fashion in belief. Man thinks that the ideal of God is old-fashioned, something of the past. In order to create a new fashion, he abandons the method which was the royal road trodden by all the wise and thoughtful of all ages, the method which will surely take men to perfection. Safety and success are sure in that path. There may be a man of devotion and of simple faith, religious and believing in God, who calls him the judge, the creator, the sustainer, the protector, the master of the last day, the Lord, the forgiver, and so on. And there may be another man, perhaps an intellectual who has studied philosophy, and he says, God is all, and all is God. God is abstract, and it is the abstract which is God. In point of fact, the one has a God, even if only in his imagination, but the other has none. He has only the abstract. He calls it God because the others say God, but in his mind he has only the abstract. For instance, when you say space, there is no personality attached to it, no intelligence recognized in it, no form, No distinct individuality or personality. It is the same thing with time. When you speak about time, you do not imagine time to be something or somebody. You say it is time, which means a conception, which you have made for your convenience. A man who says that the abstract is God has no God. By this I do not mean to say that one or the other is right. What I wish to explain is that from a mental point of view the one has a God, even if it is only a God of his imagination, but the other has none, whether he admits it or not. Both are right, and both are wrong. One is at the beginning, and the other is at the end. The one who begins with the end will end at the beginning. And the one who begins with the beginning will end at the end. We might think, why in this short life should we create for ourselves a kind of illusion? Why should we only arrive at the truth at the end? Why not begin with it? But if truth were such that it could be spoken of in words, I would have been the first to give it to you. Truth is a thing that must be discovered. We have to prepare ourselves to realize it. And it is that preparation which is called religion or occultism or mysticism. Whatever we may call it, it is that preparation. We prepare ourselves by one way or the other in order to realize truth in the end. And the best way, which all the thinkers and sages have adopted, is the way of God. The next question is belief in God. There are 4 stages of belief in God. Each stage is as essential and important as the other. And if one does not go stage by stage, gradually evolving towards the realization of God, one does not arrive at anything. It must be remembered that belief is a step on the ladder. Belief is the means and not the end. It leads to realization. It is not that we advance towards a belief. If a man's foot is nailed on the ladder, that is not the object. The object is that he should climb upward on the ladder step by step. If he stands still on the ladder, he defeats the object for which he journeys on the spiritual path. Those therefore who believe in a particular creed, in a religion, in God, in the hereafter, in the soul, in a certain dogma, are no doubt blessed by their belief and think they have something. But if they remain there, there will be no progress. If the only thing necessary was to have a religious belief, then thousands and millions of people in the world today who have a certain religious belief could have been most advanced people. But they are not. They go on year after year believing something that people have believed perhaps for many generations, and still they continue with it, and remain there just like a man standing on a staircase, which is a place not made for him to stand on, but to climb up. When he stays there he comes to nothing. The first belief is the mass belief. If someone says, "There is a God," then everyone repeats after him, "Yes, there is a God." One might think that today, at this stage of civilization, people are too advanced to have mass beliefs, but that would be a great mistake. People are the same today as they were 1,000 years ago, perhaps worse if it comes to spiritual questions. Someone who is called the man of the day in a nation is for the time being supported by the whole nation. Thousands and millions lift him up, hold him high. But for how long? Until some still more powerful person says, "No, it is not so." Then the whole country lets him down. Just before the war, one was visiting Russia. In every shop one saw a picture of the Tsar and Tsarina, held in high esteem. It was a sacred thing for people. There was a religious ideal attached to the emperor, as he was the head of the church. And they used to be filled with joy when they saw the Tsar and Tsarina passing in the street. It was a religious upliftment for them. But not long afterwards they themselves had processions in the streets when at each step they broke the Tsarist emblems. It did not take them one moment to change their belief. Why? Because it was a mass belief. It is a very powerful belief. It changes nations. It throws them down and raises them up. It brings war. But what is it after all? A mad belief. And yet no one will admit it. If you ask an individual, he says, "I am not one of them." Yet at the same time all move together when an impulse comes for good or bad. Then there is a second step towards belief, and that is belief in an authority, as with people at the time of a dictatorship. They believe in a leader. They say, "I will not believe in the ordinary man, in my neighbor, in my colleague. I believe in that man whom I trust." This belief is one step higher, because it is a belief in somebody in whom one has trust. When a person says, "I am a Christian," it means a belief in Jesus Christ and his teaching. It is a belief in someone, not in an abstraction. One might think that people do not believe in authority today, but this is not so. For instance, everyone accepts a discovery made by a scientist before having made investigations about it. Investigations come afterwards. When somebody comes forward and says he has discovered something, everyone accepts it. Perhaps another scientist will produce something else one may believe, but the one who says a thing with authority is believed by the multitude. Then there is a third stage of belief, a further stage, and this belief makes man still greater. It is the belief of reason, and it means that one does not believe in any authority, nor in what everybody else believes, but that one has reasoned it out. That one sees reason in it. This belief is stronger still, for of the beliefs I have explained before one cannot give proof, but in this case one can stand up and say, "Yes, I have reasoned it out." This, however, also has its limitation. Since reason is the slave of the mind, reason is as changeable as the weather, reason obeys our impressions. If we have an impulse to insult a person, or to fight with him, we can produce many reasons for it. It may be that afterwards there will be contrary reasons. But at the time, while we have this impulse, right or wrong, there is always a reason which supports it. Have the criminals put in jail committed crimes without a reason? No, they have a reason too. It does not fit in with the law perhaps, it does not satisfy society, but if we ask them, they have a reason. The reason we have today we may perhaps change next week, but nevertheless this third belief makes us stand on our own feet, for that moment if not always, and it gives us a greater power to defend our belief, and then again there is a fourth belief. That belief is a belief of conviction which stands above reason. There is a sense of conviction in man which is not discovered for some time in life. But there comes a time when it is discovered, and that is a blessed day. Then there arises an idea which no reason can break, a feeling which is not a passing feeling, but is a conviction. However high the idea may be, one seems to be an eyewitness of that idea. One is as strong, as confident, as a person who has seen with his own eyes. One can be convinced of ideas so subtle that they cannot even be expressed in words, and one is more convinced of them than if one had seen them with one's own eyes. It is this belief which is called by the Sufis and Persian mystics Iman, which means conviction. I remember the blessing my spiritual teacher, my Murshid, used to give me every time I parted from him. And that blessing was, "May your Iman be strengthened." At that time I had not thought about the word Iman. On the contrary, I thought as a young man, is my faith so weak that my teacher requires it to be stronger? I would have preferred it if he had said, may you become illuminated, or may your powers be great, or may your influence spread, or may you rise higher and higher, or become perfect. But this simple thing, may your faith be strengthened, what did it mean? I did not criticize, but I pondered and pondered upon the subject. And in the end I came to realize that no blessing is more valuable and important than this. For every blessing is attached to a conviction. Where there is no conviction, there is nothing. The secret of healing, the mystery of evolving, the power of all attainments, and the way to spiritual realization all come from the strengthening of that belief, which is a conviction, so that nothing can ever change it. And now we come again to the question of God. Because this is the important question, we must first make it clear in our minds before we take a further step in spiritual progress. Since to analyze God means to dethrone God, the less said on the subject the better. But at the same time, the seekers for truth who want to tread the spiritual path with open eyes and whose intellect is hungering for knowledge should know something about it. There is a Hebrew story that once Moses was walking near the bank of a river, and he saw a shepherd boy speaking to himself. Moses was interested and halted there to listen to what he was saying. The shepherd boy was saying, "O God, I have heard so much of you. You are so beautiful, you are so lovely, you are so kind, that if you ever came to me I would clothe you with my mantle, and I would guard you night and day. I would protect you from the cruel animals of this forest, and bathe you in this river, and bring to you all good things, milk and buttermilk. I would bring you a special bread. I love you so much. I would not let anyone cast his glance upon you. I would be all the time near you. I love you so much. If only I could see you once, God, I would give all I have." Moses said, "What are you saying?" The boy looked at Moses and trembled and was afraid. "Did I say anything wrong?" he asked. Moses said, "God, the protector of all beings, you think of protecting him, of giving him bread? He gives bread to the whole universe. You say you would bathe him in the river. He is the purest of all pure things. And how can you say that you will guard him who guards all beings?" And the boy trembled. He thought, "What a terrible thing I have done." He seemed to be lost. But as Moses went a few steps further, there came a voice, "Moses, what did you do? We sent you to bring our friends to us, and now you have separated one." No matter how he thought of us just the same. You should have let him think the way he was thinking about us. You should not have interfered with him. Everyone has his own imagination of God. It is best if everyone is left to his own imagination. In our daily life we may hate someone, yet the same one is loved by someone else. We may criticize, and the same one is praised by someone else. If this is so, then the conception of everyone is different. The same person is considered a saint by one and Satan by another. The God we know, or can know, is nothing but our conception, a picture that we have made of God for our own self, our own use. It is the greatest mistake for anyone to interfere with the conception of God held by another, or to think that another should have the same conception of God as he has himself. It is impossible. Many different artists have painted the picture of Christ, yet each one is different. And since we allow every artist to have his own conception of Christ, So we should allow every person to have his own conception of God. We need not blame the ancient Chinese and Greeks and Indians who believed in many gods. Many gods is too small a number. In reality, every single person has his own God. Besides, all the different conceptions are really nothing but covers over one God. Let them call God by any name, or think of him with whatever imagination they have. It is after all the highest ideal. And the ideal of each one is as high as his imagination can make it. Urging upon someone that God is abstract and formless and pure, and that God is nameless, all these things do not help that person to evolve. For the first step on the path of God is to make a conception of God. It is simply to help the seekers after God that the wise in all ages have sometimes made a small statue and called it a god or goddess. They said, "Here is God. Here is a shrine. Come there." And to the one who was not satisfied with this, they said, "Walk 200 times round the shrine before you enter, then you will be blessed." When the worshipper got tired, he naturally felt exultation because he walked in the path of God. But, one might ask, if we leave everyone with his particular imagination or ideal of God, will he then progress and one day come to the realization of the self, which is the highest attainment taught by all great teachers of humanity? The answer is yes. There are 3 stages on the way to spiritual perfection. Those who are unaware of the possibility of spiritual perfection are greatly mistaken when they say that man is imperfect and cannot be perfect. They are mistaken for the reason that they have seen only man in man. They have not seen God in man. Christ has said, "Be ye perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect." This shows that there is the possibility of perfection. It is also true that man cannot be perfect. But man is not man alone. In man there is also God. Therefore, though man remains imperfect, the God part in man seeks for perfection. That is what the world was created for. Man is here on earth for this one purpose, that he may bring forth that Spirit of God in him, and thus discover his own perfection. The 3 stages towards this perfection are the following. The first stage is to make God as great and as perfect as your imagination can. It is in order to help man to perfect God in himself that the teachers gave various prayers, the prayers to God, calling him the judge, the forgiver, most compassionate, most faithful, most beautiful, most loving. All these attributes are our limited conceptions. God is greater than what we can say about him. And when by all these conceptions and by our imagination we make God as great as we are able to, it must still be understood that God cannot be made greater than he is. We cannot give God pleasure by making him great, but by making God great we ourselves arrive at a certain greatness. Our vision widens, our spirit deepens, our ideal reaches higher. We create a greater vision, a wider horizon, for our own expansion. We should, therefore, by way of prayer, by praise, by contemplation, try to make God as great as we can possibly imagine. The truth behind this is that a person who sees good points in others and wants to add what is lacking in others becomes nobler every day. By making others noble, by thinking good of others, he himself becomes nobler and better than those of whom he thinks good. And the one who thinks evil of others in time becomes wicked, for he covers up the good in him and produces thus the vision of evil. Therefore, the first stage and the first duty of every seeker after truth is to make God as great as possible for his own good, because he is making an ideal within himself. He is building within himself that which will make him great. The second stage is the work of the heart. The first is of the head. To make God great intellectually, with thought and imagination, is really the painter's work, but still more important is the work of the heart. In our everyday life we see the phenomenon of love. The first lesson that love teaches us is, I am not, thou art. The first thing to think of is to erase ourselves from our minds and to think of the one we love. As long as we do not arrive at this idea, so long the word love remains only in the dictionary. Many speak about love, but very few know it. Is love a pastime, an amusement, a drama? Is it a performance? The first lesson of love is sacrifice, service, self-effacement. There is a little story of a peasant girl who was passing through a field where a Muslim was offering his prayers. And the law was that no one should pass by a place where somebody was praying. After a time this girl returned by the same way, and the man said, "Oh girl, what a terrible thing you have done today." She was shocked and asked, "What did I do?" He said, "You passed by this way. It is a great sin." "I was praying, thinking of God." She said, "Were you thinking of God?" "I was going to see my young man." "I did not see you. How did you see me when you were thinking of God?" To close the eyes for prayer is one thing, and to produce the love of God is another thing. That is the second stage in spiritual realization, wherein the thought of God one begins to lose oneself, in the same way that the lover loses the thought of self and the thought of the beloved. And the third stage is different again. In the third stage the beloved becomes the self, and the self is there no more. For then the self, as we think it to be, no longer remains. The self becomes what it really is. It is that realization which is called self-realization. Man, the master of his destiny. It is said in the Gaian, the present is the reflection of the past, and the future is the re-echo of the present. Destiny is not what is already made. Destiny is what we are making. Very often fatalists think that we are in the hands of destiny, driven in whatever direction in life destiny wills, but in point of fact we are the masters of our destiny, especially from the moment we begin to realize this fact. Among Hindus there is a well-known saying that the creation is Brahma's dream, in other words that all manifestation is the dream of the Creator. I would wish to add to this that destiny means the materialization of man's own thought. Man is responsible for his success and failure, for his rise and fall. And it is man who brings these about either knowingly or unknowingly. There is a hint of this in the Bible, in the principal prayer taught by Christ, in which it is said, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." It is a psychological suggestion to mankind to make it possible that the will of God, which is easily done in heaven, should also be done on earth. And the English saying that man proposes and God disposes supports this. It suggests the other side of the same truth. These seem to be two contrary ideas, yet they explain the same theory. That what is meant by destiny is changed by man, but that destiny also changes man's plans. The more we study life, the more we understand that it is not only qualifications, enthusiasm, and energy that count, but also the design, the plan already made. And according to that plan, man has to go through his destiny. No doubt one should not use this to support the argument of some fatalists who think that they can sit back comfortably and wait for better times to come. They may just as well wait for the rest of their life and not accomplish anything. The question of destiny can be better explained by the picture of an artist meditating on a certain design he has in his mind. The first stage is to create the design in his mind. The second is to bring it onto the canvas. And when he draws this picture on the canvas, it may suggest something to him that he had not thought of when he made the design in his mind. And when the artist has finished his picture, he will see that it is quite different from what he had originally thought of. This shows that our life stands before us like a picture. When all that has been designed beforehand begins to happen, our soul will receive a totally different suggestion from the picture. Something that was lacking may have been put in, and in this way the picture is improved. For there are two kinds of artists. One who paints the plan which has been made in his mind on the canvas, and the other who takes suggestions from the picture itself as he goes on painting. The difference is that the one is merely an artist, and the other is a master. The latter is not bound to the plan. The former has designed something and is bound to what he has designed. He is limited. One sees the same thing with a composer of music. He composes a certain melody in his mind, he ponders over it and wishes to put it on paper. But when he plays his composition on the piano, the music suggests improvements to him. He plays the same musical idea that he first had, but he is able to perfect and complete it when he has heard it with his own ears. That is a picture of our life. There is one man who is driven by the hand of destiny. He does not know where he comes from. He does not know where he is going. He is placed in certain conditions in life. He is busy with something, occupied with something, and he cannot see any other way of getting on. He may desire something quite different. He may have difficulty in putting his mind to what he is doing, but he still thinks he must go on. That is the man who has not yet understood the meaning of the secret. But there is another man who, even after 100 failures, is still determined that he will succeed at the next attempt. That man is the master of his success. There are two parts in man. One part is his external self, which the soul has borrowed from the earth, and the other part is his real self, which belongs to his source. In other words, an individual is a combination of spirit and matter, a current which runs from above and attracts to it the earth from below, shaping it in order to make it a vehicle. The human body is nothing but a vehicle of the soul which has come from above and has taken the human body as its abode. Thus an individual has two aspects of being. One is the soul, the other is the body. It is the meeting of the soul and the body which makes the mind, and these three together make an individual. The external part of an individual can be likened to the outer form of a globe, while the mind takes the place of the finer inner machinery. This is the mechanical part of being. There remains the soul, which is the divine heritage, a spiritual current shooting forth from that spirit, which is the source of all things. Therefore the soul has in it a potentiality, a creative power as its divine heritage. On the one side man is limited and imperfect. On the other side he represents the unlimited and perfect. That is why Christ has said, "Be ye perfect even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." It means, one not only inherits from one's earthly parents, but one also inherits that creative power, which makes one's life from the Father in heaven. A soul is born with a mechanism which one calls mind and body. From infancy a soul naturally finds itself limited in captivity. All the tragedy of life comes from limitation. If you ask 100 people what is the difficulty in their life, Each one will name a different struggle that he is facing at the time. But in reality it will be the limitation of life which has caused the tragedies in every form. Man grows up in limitation, and this limitation suggests to him at every step that he is imperfect, handicapped, weak, captive, incapable. And it is because of this constant suggestion of imperfection that he begins to say, I cannot endure it, I cannot stand it, I cannot bear it, I cannot forget it, I cannot forgive. A man begins to think all these things because he is imperfect, because of all the continual suggestions which arise in life and convince him that he is limited. Naturally, therefore, as the man goes on, whether he is successful or unsuccessful, whether he is more qualified or less, whatever his condition may be, his mind holds the thought that his power and inspiration, his knowledge and capability are limited. He cannot understand anything else but that, and he remains totally unaware of that spark which continually shines in his heart, and which may be called his divine inheritance. Is there a possibility of changing, or of improving our destiny? We in our material life become so rigid in our thinking that we cannot imagine something existing and at the same time improving and changing. We are only capable of recognizing change as far as we can see it, and the moment we cannot see that change anymore, we call it destruction or death. In other words, what we call destruction or death is only a change. We cannot follow, we cannot see the link. It is not visible to us, we cannot fathom it, and therefore we say that it is the end. But is there anything that ends, that is destroyed, or anything that has ceased? Nothing. All these words are our own illusion, our own conception, a conception which is only true as long as we have not seen the continuity. As soon as we understand this mystery, we no longer continue to have that conception. When we see life end suddenly, we call it death. We say a word, in this case death, and once that word is spoken, it is the end of the matter for us. But the word is never silent, it continues, if not in this then in another sphere. So it is with thought. We have a thought and then we say, I have forgotten. Yes, the mind has forgotten, but the thought is not dead. It is going on. It never ends. Is there anything that ends? Nothing. Such words as beginning and end are our conceptions, and the further we go in studying life, the higher the realization we get of those conceptions. It is this principle which is called unlearning. People are proud and satisfied with what they have learned, but the further one goes, the more one finds that learning ends in unlearning. Then another learning begins. It is like turning life inside out. We are walking on the same earth under the same sun, but we are looking at a different world with different eyes. Life is a different life to us then, and the meaning of every word is different. Those who have realized in themselves the possibility of improving their lives, do improve them. But the one who thinks, I cannot help it. I am what I am. I get angry, I cannot help it. I get annoyed, I cannot help it. I cannot understand, I cannot bear it. That person comes under his own suggestion, and he naturally becomes weaker every day and cannot accomplish things. But the one who realizes that life begins with spirit says, what does it matter? If I fail today, I will succeed tomorrow. The present limitation does not discourage me. It is never too late in life to improve. There is always scope for the man who wants to improve himself. But the man who is content with himself, or so discouraged that he does not want to improve, falls flat. There is no way for him to accomplish anything in life. The spirit of those who went to mountain caves or lived in the forests was a meditative one. One might think it was an undesirable life. Yes, perhaps undesirable to follow, but in relation to what they reached, the experience they gained was most desirable. There is much that could be exchanged between East and West. The West has improved and cultivated and invented many things which should go to the East. And the experience of those in the East who went to the forests and sat in meditation under the shade of trees should be taken to the West. It is this that will bring East and West closer, to the best advantage of the whole of humanity. There is a story of Timurlenk, the great Mughal emperor, a man whom destiny had intended to be great. Yet he was not awakened to that greatness. One day, tired of the strife of daily life and overwhelmed by his worldly duties, he was lying on the ground in a forest waiting for death to come and take him. A dervish passed by and saw him asleep and recognized in him the man that destiny had intended to become a great personality. The dervish struck him with his stick, and Timurlenk woke up and asked, "Why have you come to trouble me here? I have left the world and have come to the forest. Why do you come to trouble me?" The dervish said, "What gain is there in the forest? You have the whole world before you. It is there that you will find what you have to accomplish, if only you realize the power that is within you." He said, "No, I am too disappointed, too pessimistic for any good to come to me. The world has wounded me. I am sore, my heart is broken. I will no longer stay in this world." The dervish said, "What is the use of having come to this earth if you have not accomplished something, if you have not experienced something? If you are not happy, you do not know how to live." Timurlenk said to the dervish, "Do you think that I shall ever accomplish anything?" The dervish answered, "That is why I have come to awaken you. Wake up and pursue your duty with courage. You will be successful, there is no doubt about it." This impression awakened in Timurlenk the spirit with which he had come into the world. And with every step that he took forward, he saw that conditions changed, and all the influences and forces that he needed for success came to him, as if life, which before had closed its doors, now opened all to him. And he reached the stage where he became the famous Timurlenk of history. In all walks of life it will be proved to the seeker after truth that there is a key to success, a key to happiness, a key to advancement and evolution in life. And this key is the attainment of mastery. The question is, how does one attain mastery? There are 3 stages. The first stage of mastery is the attaining of self-control. And when one's self-control is gained, then the second stage is to control all the influences that pull one away from the path which one wishes to take. And when one has been victorious in this second stage, then there is a third stage, which is the control of conditions, of situations. The man who is responsible, the man who has control over conditions and situations, is greater than 1,000 men who may be otherwise well qualified, but do not have this. The one who is able to control them may sit in his chair appearing to do nothing, but he will accomplish more than one who is doing things all day long. Very few can imagine to what an extent a man can gain power, especially as life today is a continual strife for nothing, a busy life without much accomplishment. We cannot imagine to what an extent the power of the mastermind can accomplish things. But it is done behind the scenes. Those who do little come forward and say they can do so much, but those who really do something say little. There are 3 aspects of the mastermind, or Sahib-i-Dil as he is called in Persian. These three aspects are connected with three different temperaments. One is the saintly temperament, another is that of the master, and the third is the temperament of the prophet. When a person has attained mastery, it may be called an inner initiation. From that time he is consciously used to fulfill a certain purpose. Every soul is here on earth in order to fulfill a certain purpose in the scheme of life. But when one has reached mastery, from that moment one is chosen by providence to be used as a tool, an instrument, to accomplish a certain purpose. Humanity, every single human being, is a kind of raw material which destiny uses. The master mind, however, is a finished instrument which destiny handles to accomplish its purpose. The saintly temperament is the negative temperament, resigned, perfectly resigned, to the will of God. The saint has learned patience, confidence, endurance, tolerance. He has carried the cross, he is crucified 1,000 times in his life. He knows what love means. He has taken a path of devotion. He leads a life of service, he has effaced himself, he has crushed his personality. He has dissolved the rock out of which he was made into water. His way is not the way of the hammer but of the water. The hammer breaks a rock, but the water surrounds it and makes its way. That is why the saintly personality gives peace and harmony and comfort to those who come in contact with it. It is such a personality which heals and lifts up those who are groping in darkness, who are touching the depths of the earth. He has developed a love that one sees in a mother and father, but he has that love for every person, for every soul. It is not just a fable that the trees and plants and rocks spoke to the saints. It is the truth. When a person has developed that sympathy, he is sympathetic to rock and plant and tree. Everything in nature opens up before him. It is through that at one moment that he is able to communicate with every form of life, whatever it is. Therefore it is not necessary that he should leave the world. Whether he is in the forest or amidst a world strife, the soul of man is always capable of rising to the greatest heights, if only he wishes to attain to them. The other aspect is the aspect of the master. Resistance against all that increases his weakness, that appeals to his weakness, the tendency of continual perseverance, courage and boldness, firmness and steadiness, all such qualities manifest in the master. That is the difference between saint and master. One is active, the other passive. One is resigned, the other persistent. But at the same time both are going forward. Only their ways are different. One is the positive way, the other the negative way. One is the way of power, the other of gentleness. Nevertheless, both have their purpose to accomplish in the scheme of nature. And the master's path, the will, is used mostly in regard to outer things. In the saintly path, the will is used to control one's own self. In other words, it is used for the time being against one's own self. The saint is resigned to causa, and the master has regard for cadre. But in order to know the will of God, it is wise first to take one's own will in hand and use it in the knowledge that it is given for some great purpose in life. And the third aspect is the aspect of the prophet, in whom these two qualities are balanced. On one hand the prophet is power, on the other hand gentleness itself. On the one hand the prophet is courage, on the other he is the personification of divine sympathy. On the one hand the prophet is enthusiastic in his desire to change the condition of humanity, on the other hand, the prophet is retired from all things of life. All these opposite qualities are balanced in the spirit of the prophet. The work of the prophet is a greater work than that of the master or saint. They can remain behind the scenes, but the prophet is before the world to awaken humanity, to raise mankind to a higher consciousness, to inspire it, and to voice the truth, so that it may have its echo on the earth, in the sky, everywhere. Do not be surprised, therefore, when you hear that the words of Buddha or Muhammad are still being cherished after so many years, or that the personality of Christ still has power after 2000 years. They have won humanity. They were prophets because that part of their experience, which we know in history, was real and will always remain real. Mastery is not only a means of accomplishing the things of the world, but it is that by which a person fulfills the purpose of his life. Everything to be found on earth, such as gold and silver, gems and jewels, is all for mankind. And all that gives happiness, such as power, intelligence, harmony, peace, inspiration, ecstasy, joy, also belongs to man. Man can make a heavenly experience his treasure, just as well as an earthly possession. It is not necessary for man to leave all the things of the world and go into retreat. He can attend to his business, to his profession, to his duties in life, and yet at the same time develop the spirit in himself, which is the spirit of mastery. The spirit of mastery is like a spark. By blowing continually upon it, it will grow into a blaze, and out of it a flame will rise. Man does not need to trouble about what is lacking outside, for in reality all is within himself. And if he will keep this idea before him and blow on the spark of mastery by constant contemplation, then one day that flame will rise and his life will become clear, and his power will indeed be great. There are two opposite opinions existing in the world. One belongs to those who are called fatalists, those who believe in fate, and the other is the opinion of those who believe in free will. And if we look at life from both these points of view, we shall find reasons for and against each. There are many instances in life where there are qualifications, conditions, inclinations and every possibility of progress, yet at the same time there is some unknown hindrance, and one cannot find out what it is. A man may work for years and years and not succeed. There are also many who hope and believe that all good things will come of themselves, but just by hoping and believing good things do not come. It takes an effort and persistence. It needs patience to accomplish things. This shows that there is truth in both possibilities, but at the same time the middle way is the best, the way of understanding how far free will works, and also where free will is hindered. Life according to the mystic's point of view can be divided into two aspects. One is the preparatory aspect, and the other is that of action. The preparatory aspect is the time before a person is born, and the other aspect is the time after his birth. A person may be born into a certain condition which becomes the foundation of his life's course. For instance, among people who are addicted to drink or in a rich family, the credit for what he does, considering that condition, belongs to him. But that condition is something he has not made, from it he has to develop and evolve through life. And the question is how this condition is brought about. Eastern philosophers have had different ideas about this matter. The way that the wise and the mystics look at it is that man is a ray of the spirit, like a ray shooting forth from the sun. Therefore the origin of all souls is one and the same, just as the origin of the various rays is in the one sun. But as these rays shoot forth they pass through three different phases, in other words, they penetrate through three different spheres. When the ray shoots forth, the first sphere it passes is the angelic sphere, The next is the sphere of the genius or jinn, and the third is the physical sphere, as they are recognized in the metaphysics of the East. Now the nature of each sphere is such that the ray or soul, when it penetrates through a certain sphere, must clothe itself in the garb of that sphere. Just as a person from a tropical country, going to a cold climate, must adopt the clothes of that climate, so the soul, which by origin is intelligence and a ray of that sun which is the source and goal of all beings, adopts a certain garb with which it is able to enter, to stay, and to pass through that particular sphere. Therefore, according to the metaphysics of the East, man is an angel, a jinn, and is also man. In these three conditions the soul is the same, though the garb it has taken makes it seem different. Passing through the angelic sphere the soul is angel, passing through the sphere of the genius the soul is jinn, passing through the physical sphere the soul is man. The soul's condition in the preparatory stages of angel and jinn in the end makes it man. What about the animals, and about many other beings and objects which show some part of life in them, such as trees and plants and rocks? All these are preparatory coverings, which make the clothes, the garb, for the soul. There is a saying of a great sage of Persia who lived 500 years before Darwin, and who gave his ideas on biology. He said that God slept in the rocks, God dreamed in the plant, God awoke in the animal, and God realized himself in man. It tells that this process, from the vegetable to the animal, from the animal to man, is really the progress of the garb. For instance, the first clothes were made of the bark of a tree. Then as people went on making clothes they found better materials and finally came to the finest. Man is the finest material. His garb, not his soul. His soul is the same as that of the man of 1,000 years ago. The material has changed and has progressed with the evolution of the soul which has adorned itself with it. In this way the vanity of creatures has been made manifest. And as the matter of our bodies changes every few years, we attract a finer and finer quality of matter as we grow spiritually. Spiritual advancement has an influence upon the body. There is also another outlook on this subject. That although the soul, as a ray, goes forward to the physical sphere, yet its nature is to go backward, because it follows the law of gravitation. Just as the body, which is made of clay, is drawn to the earth, so the soul, which belongs to the spirit, is drawn to the spirit. But one may say, we can see the body drawn to the earth, we can see all things of the earth drawn to the earth, but we do not see the law of gravitation working in the soul. Actually we do see it, but we deny it, because we do not look at it in that way. For there is a dissatisfaction, a discontent, in every soul. A man may be in a palace or in a cottage, but no matter what condition he lives in there is an innate yearning and longing which even he himself does not recognize. One thinks today that one longs for money, tomorrow for a position, for fame or name. One goes from one thing to another. It just goes on, and when in the end one has reached one's object one wants something else. It is the law of gravitation, that yearning towards the spirit, the sun, which is at the back of it. That is why in ancient times people worshipped the sun god as a symbol of the sun within us, the sun which cannot be seen by our eyes, but which is the source and goal of all beings, from which we have come, and to which we are drawn. As it is said in the Quran, from God we all come and to Him we have to return. That means, there is a spirit, the spirit of all things, the essence of life from which we come, and towards which we are drawn. These three spheres can only be entered on one condition, and that condition is that the soul must clothe itself in the garb belonging to that particular sphere. It is that garb which makes an entity of the soul, which hitherto was without any distinction or attribute. As soon as it has adopted this garb, it becomes an entity. Before it was only a divine ray. The first garb makes the soul an entity known as an angel. The next garb makes it a mind, and the third garb makes it a body. Is the mind within the body, and is the soul within the mind? As according to science the brain is within the body, one could think that the mind too is within the body, but it is not so. It is as much within as without. It is vaster and wider than the physical body. A jug cannot contain the water of a lake, and so the body cannot contain in itself the mind. Yet the jug can contain some water from the lake, and the body can contain some of the mind within itself. But the word within has a quite different meaning from that which we attach to it in everyday language. When we speak of the mind being within, it means a different dimension. It does not mean in the head or in the breast. It means within each atom of the body, and within every nerve and every blood cell. And at the same time that it means within, it means behind or beneath or under or nearest to the soul, nearest to our being. That is the meaning of within. The mind is both within and without the body. And so in the same way the soul is both within the mind and without the mind. One might ask to what extent the jinn world and the angelic world occupies space in our world and pervade it. But what is space? Space is that which accommodates. The mind is a space also, a space which is wider than the world. Our eye is a space too. And as the mind does not mean the brain, so the space in the eyes of our body is not the only space. Behind it is another space which is connected with it. And when this idea becomes clear to man, that there is another space, different from this outer space which already accommodates so much, then the vision of the heavens is open before him. When a Chinese philosopher was asked what the soul is like, he answered that it is like the pupil of the eye. He meant to say that the soul is an accommodation, like the pupil of the eye, which is so small and yet accommodates so much. And think of the heart. If there were 1,000 universes, it would accommodate them all, it is so large. As the former Nizam of Hyderabad, who was a mystic, said, "What is the universe in the entire cosmos?" If the doors of the heart are open, the heart proves to be larger than the whole cosmos. What little one can understand of this is shown by the sign of the cross. There is a horizontal space and there is another kind of space, which can be pictured as a perpendicular line. It is to explain the latter space that the mystics and seers have used the word within, and to explain the space of the world, they have used the word without. The entities or souls which shoot forth from the spirit into these three spheres have in each of them the experience of meeting those souls which are returning from manifestation. It is just like a person going from the United States to the Far East, and another going from the Far East to the United States, and both meeting in Europe. They give each other whatever they have. The one coming from the spirit gives magnetism, electricity, intelligence, freedom and freshness, love and life. And the one returning gives experience, knowledge, impression, expression, desires, wishes, thoughts of the wickedness and goodness of the earth, all that he has learned and earned and done and wants to accomplish. All these things are exchanged. It is like the way in which one man may come from Europe with an introduction to the United States, which would take him into the best society, and another one who has not received any introduction might go to quite the wrong people. Thus the soul comes on earth already prepared during the journey through these two spheres. Now supposing for instance the returning soul of Shakespeare met in the world of the jinn another soul coming from the inner spirit and gave all its experience and qualities and attainments to this soul which was coming to the earth. Then this soul would be born with the same qualities as Shakespeare, with the tendency to write poetry, and with much of the knowledge which Shakespeare expressed in his works. According to the Hindus, this person may be called the reincarnation of Shakespeare. But one might think, what has happened to Shakespeare himself? Is it not Shakespeare who has come again in this person? Yes, but what we know of Shakespeare is of his mind and his body. Shakespeare's soul was a divine ray. It had no peculiarity that might serve as a proof of his being Shakespeare. The Shakespeare in him was outwardly his physical body and inwardly his mind. That mind was impressed on a soul who came forth onto the earth with the heritage already received from Shakespeare. And for Shakespeare to continue further towards the inner spirit, it was necessary to throw away that garment. Therefore the mind of Shakespeare was a garment borrowed from the jinn plane. That garment he may have given to another one. So if you say, what about Shakespeare? The first question really is, who is Shakespeare? Because it is not the soul, it is the garment which has come again, renewed. The difference is only in words. In its deeper sense there is no difference. There seems to be a great dissimilarity between the ideas of Buddhism and those of Christianity about reincarnation. The reason is that the message of Jesus Christ was given to the children of Bnei Israel, to those prepared to understand God as the King, as the Master of the Day of Judgment, as the one who is all justice and all power. While the message which Buddha gave was to the people of India, who were more metaphysical and scientific. The simple people of India had their gods and goddesses, and they were satisfied with their religion. But the intellectual class was not satisfied with the gods and goddesses alone and with a religion of devotion. They were scientific and logical. They had their own philosophies. Buddha's mission therefore was to give the people of India an understanding beyond what religious devotion can teach. That is why he did not give the essential wisdom in the form of religion, but in the form of philosophy. The common belief was in reincarnation. And it was much easier for the master not to attack that particular belief, but to build on that belief a wonderful structure. Some Buddhists today whose insight is great wonder why Buddha gave this theory and why he did not give a reason for it. I was very much interested once in San Francisco where a Buddhist came to see me. He was a well-known preacher of Buddhism in Japan. There was another man present who had read many Buddhist books. I was eagerly waiting to hear what this Buddhist priest had to say, but he did not think it necessary to say anything. In order to make him speak, I said I would so much like to know the Buddhist teaching about reincarnation. But the other man, the one who had read many books, said, reincarnation is the principal idea in the Buddhist religion. That one is born again and again. And that is what constitutes karma. But I was eager to hear something from the priest. After the other had finished his explanation, I asked the Buddhist preacher if this was right. And in his simple way of speaking, he said, what this gentleman has said is his belief. He said no more. If one should ask if there is such a thing as reincarnation, the answer is both yes and no. Why? Because in both answers there is sense, and both answers are true. When you look at life as one life, then you do not look upon people as separate entities. Then you cannot say that this person has reincarnated as another. It is the one who is all, and each one is nothing. Either you look at life in that way or you look at life by seeing each person as a separate entity. Naturally, as everything has to go on being something, it must still exist after it is destroyed, it must have an existence in some form. But the destruction or death is only a change. Something cannot be nothing. If it is nothing to our eyes, it is because we do not see. Everything must exist in some form or other. Thus the theory of reincarnation teaches that there is nothing which will be nothing, that everything will be something, must be something. The other conception is this. If the source is one, the goal is one, then all that we see is phenomena as long as we do not look deeply. When once we look deeply, we shall no longer distinguish separate entities. Then we shall see one life, one being. And then there is no reason to think about reincarnation. The thought of Buddha was the same as the teaching of Jesus Christ, only given to Hindus in another form. The religion of the Master was the same whether he was called Buddha or Christ. The more we think of this subject, the more we shall find that a preparation is made for man before he is born on earth, and it is that preparation which makes him able to live the life on earth. What is this life on earth? Is this a life which is fixed and designed, or is there free will? Very often people do not understand the meaning of the term free will, and especially those who claim most to have free will have the least of it. They are so conscious of their free will, and yet they do not know where it comes from. When they have an inclination to laugh or cry, to sit or move, they believe that it is because they want to do it. But they do not know where the thought came from. Do we not feel every day at some time an oppression, seemingly without reason, or a feeling of hilarity or of despair, or a desire for action, and at other times a feeling of lethargy? We think that whatever comes into one's mind is free will. But free will is quite different from that. We each have our free will. And that free will gives us the power to work to some extent within the activity of the whole. But both that which we decide and that which conditions create can all be summed up in the will of God. We have our individual part to perform, and we must do what we feel is right. How can there be free will, one might ask, if all is God? The power of water is different from the power of fire. The power of fire is different from the power of earth. So the action of each individual is different, although in the soul of each there is God. According to conditions and education, temperaments differ, yet God is in all. There are many things one has to overcome before one sets forth upon the journey to higher realization. But at each step one takes towards the realization of truth, one will feel more self-confident. And the more one overcomes all doubts and the more one's self-confidence grows, the greater will be one's will, and the closer to truth one reaches, the more light one will see. And what is that light? It is the light of self-realization. The law of action. To say that results are according to deeds sounds simple, for almost everyone knows it. But not everyone always follows it, and the reason is that knowing a law does not necessarily enable man to observe that law. Besides, the nature of life is so intoxicating that, absorbed in the activity of life, one mostly forgets this rule. It is natural, however, that this most simple thing should be very difficult to practice, because one generally neglects to think seriously about it. In order to prove this theory, that the results of a deed are similar to the deed, one need not go far. One can see numberless examples in one's own life and in the lives of others. For it is like an echo. What one does has an echo, and in that echo is the result. Zarathustra says that actions may be divided into three kinds: deed, speech, and thought. One may not do wrong, but one may speak wrongly. One may not speak wrongly, but one may think wrongly. And the wrong is done just the same. And how many people excuse themselves by saying, "I only said it, but I did not do it." A person can even excuse himself by saying, "I did not say it, I only thought it." According to the ideas of the mystics, the world in which we make our life is an akasha, and akasha means capacity. It is pictured by them as a dome, and whatever is spoken in it has its echo. Therefore no one can do, say, or think anything for one moment which will become non-existent. It is recorded, and that record is creative. It is not only what one does, says, or thinks that is recorded in the memory or in the atmosphere, but that record also creates at every moment, so that every line and letter of it becomes the seed or the germ that produces a similar effect. I once heard a sculptor say that every man is the sculptor of his own image. Not only is this true, but every man is also the creator of his own conditions, favorable or unfavorable. The difficulty is that man never has the patience to wait till he sees the result. For the result takes some time to manifest, and before that he may meet with contrary effects. For instance, a man who has just robbed another person may have the good luck to find in the street a purse full of gold coins. Naturally he will think, "What a good result after good work. Now that it is shown that I have done good work, I must continue it." It is the simple ones who say things against it, but I have seen the good results in my own experience. Life is so intoxicating that it gives man no time to think that the result of one's deed is perhaps waiting. That what happens today may be the result of something else further back. When we consider the law of action, we see that it can be divided into 5 different aspects. One aspect is the law of the community. For this law is made for the comfort and convenience of the members of that community. Another aspect can be called the law of the state. It is the law by which different classes of people and different communities are governed as one whole. No doubt this aspect of the law is as limited as the mind of man. Naturally, therefore, many laws are rejected, and many new laws are made and brought into practice. And as time goes on, people will see that the members of the community or the state will always wish for changes to be made in the law. This has always been and will always be. The third aspect of the law is the law of a church, a law which perhaps comes from tradition, a law that people accept, not only because it is a law by which they are governed, but because it is a law that is concerned with their faith, with their belief, which is sacred to them. It is this law which builds a conscience, more than any other aspect of the law. But then there is another aspect, and that is the law brought by the prophets from time to time. And what is this law? It comes as an interpretation of the hidden law which a prophet has been able to see. But a law given by a prophet is also related to the period in which he lived, to the people of that period and their particular evolution. Thus this law is brought about by 2 actions. One action is the condition of humanity at that specific time, reflected in the heart of the prophet. And the other is the light of God, shining from above to make that condition so clear that a solution can be found for it. It is this solution which can be called the divine law, given by the prophet. When we study the religions given by various prophets to different people in this world, in different periods of the world's history, we shall find that the truth which is behind all the religions is the same. If the teaching differs, it differs only in the law they have given. People have always disputed in vain over this difference in the laws that the different teachers have given to their people, not realizing how much that law depended on the people who received it and on the time when it was given. But these four laws mentioned above, the law of the community, of the state, of the church, and of the prophet, all have their limitations. There is, however, one law which leads man towards the unlimited. And this law can never be taught and can never be explained. At the same time, this law is rooted in the nature of man, and there is no person, however unjust and wicked he may seem, who has not got this faculty in his innermost being. It may be called a faculty, for it is the faculty of discerning between right and wrong. But what determines that something should be called right or wrong? Four things: the motive behind the action, the result of the action, the time, and the place. Wrong action with the right motive may be right, and a right action with wrong motive may be wrong. We are always ready to judge an action, and we hardly think of the motive. That is why we readily accuse a person for his wrong, and excuse ourselves readily for our wrong, because we know our motive best. We would perhaps excuse another person as we excuse ourselves if we tried to know the motive behind his action too. A thought, a word, or an action in the wrong place turns into a wrong one, even if it was right in itself. A thought or word or action at a wrong time may be wrong, although it may seem right. And when we analyze this more and more, we shall say, as a Hindu poet has said, there is no use in feeling bad about the wrong deed of another person. We should content ourselves with the thought that he could not do better. To look at everything, trying to see what is behind it, to see it in its right light, requires divine illumination, a spiritual outlook on life. And this outlook is attained by the increase of compassion. The more compassion one has in one's heart, the more the world will begin to look different. There is another side to this question. Things seem to us according to how we look at them. To a wrong person everything looks wrong, and to a right person everything looks right. For a right person turns wrong into right, and a wrong person turns right into wrong. The sin of the virtuous is a virtue, and the virtue of a sinner is a sin. Things depend very much upon our interpretation, as there is no seal on any action, word, or thought which determines it to be wrong or right. There is still another side to it. How much our favor and disfavor play their part in discerning right and wrong. In someone whom we love and like and admire, we wish to see everything wrong in a right light. Our reason readily comes to the rescue of the loved one. It always brings an argument as to what is right and what excuses his wrong. And how readily do we see the faults and errors of the one whom we disfavor. And how difficult it is for us to find a fault, even if we wanted to, in someone we love. Therefore, if in the life of Christ we read how he forgave those who were accused of great faults or great sins, we can now see that it was natural that the one who was the lover of mankind could not see faults. The only thing he could see was forgiveness. A stupid or simple person is always ready to see the wrong in another and ready to form an opinion and to judge. But you will find a wise person expressing his opinion of others quite differently, always trying to tolerate and always trying to forgive still more. The present is the reflection of the past, and the future will be the echo of the present. This saying will always prove true. The Sufis of Persia have classified the evolution of personality in 5 different grades. The first is the person who errs at every step in his life and who finds fault with others at every moment of his life. One can picture this person as someone who is always likely to fall, who is on the point of tumbling down, and when he falls he at once catches someone else and pulls him down with him. This is not rare if we study the psychology of man. The one who finds fault with another is very often the one who has the most faults himself. The right person first finds fault with himself. The wrong person finds fault with himself last. Only after having found fault with the whole world does he find fault with himself. And then everything is wrong, then the whole world is wrong. The next grade of personality is that of the one who begins to see the wrong in himself and the right in the other. Naturally, he has the opportunity in his life to correct himself because he finds time to discover all his own faults. The one who finds fault with others has no time to find fault with himself. Besides, he cannot be just. The faculty of justice cannot be awakened unless one begins to practice that justice by finding the faults in oneself. The third person is the one who says, "What does it matter if you did wrong or if I did wrong? What is needed is to right the wrong." He naturally develops himself and helps his fellow men also to develop. Then there is the fourth man, who can never see what is called good without the possibility of its becoming bad, and who can never see what is called bad without the possibility of that bad turning into good. The best person in the world cannot hide his faults before him, and the worst person in the world will show his merit to his eyes. But when man has risen to the 5th grade of personality, then these opposite ideas of right or wrong, good or bad, seem to be like the 2 ends of one line. When that time has come, he can say little about it, for people will not believe him. While he is the one who can judge rightly, yet he will be the last to judge. There are 3 different ways that man may take in order to progress towards human perfection. But a person who is not evolved enough to adopt the 3rd way or the 2nd way should not be forced to attempt them. If he were forced at this stage, it would mean that he was only taught a manner. For these 3 ways are like 3 steps towards human perfection. The first degree is the law of reciprocity. It is in this degree that one learns the meaning of justice. The law of reciprocity is to give and to take sympathy, and all that sympathy can give and take. It is according to this law that the religion and the laws of the state and of the community are made. The idea of this law is that you may not take from me more than you could give me. I will not give you more than I could take from you. It is fair business. You love me, I can love you. You hate me, I can hate you. And according to this law, if a person has not learned the just measure of give and take, he has not practiced justice. He may be innocent, he may be loving, but he has no common sense, he is not practical. The danger in this law is that a person may value most what he himself does, and may diminish the value of what is done by another. But the one who gives more than he takes is progressing towards the next grade. It is easy for us to say that this is a very hard and fast law. But at the same time, it is the most difficult thing to live in this world and to avoid it. One must ask a practical man, a man with common sense, if it is possible to live in this world and not to observe this law of give and take. If the people of the world did no better than keep this law properly, there would be much less trouble in this world. It is no use thinking that people will become saints or sages or great beings. If they became just, it would already be something. And now we come to the next step. This is the law of beneficence. And this law means being unconcerned with how another person responds to us in answer to what we do to him in love and sympathy. What concerns one is what can one do for the other person. It does not matter if a favor is not appreciated. Even if the favor were absolutely ignored, still the satisfaction of the beneficent man comes from what he has done, not from what the one who has received it has expressed. When this sense is born in man, from that day he begins to live in the world. For his pleasure does not depend upon what he receives from others, but depends upon what he does for others. His happiness is not dependent on anything. His happiness is independent. He becomes the creator of his happiness. His happiness is in giving, not in taking. But what do I mean by giving? We give and take every moment of the day. Every word we speak, every action we do, every thought and feeling we have for one another, is all giving and all taking. But it is the man who gives who will forget his sorrow, it is he who will forget his miseries, it is he who will rise above the pains and miseries of this world. Then comes the third law, and that is the law of renunciation. To the one who observes this law, giving means nothing. For he is not even conscious of the fact that he gives automatically. He never thinks I give, he thinks that it is being given. This person may be pictured as someone walking on the water. For it is he who will rise absolutely above the disappointments, distresses, and pains of life which are so numberless. Besides, renunciation means independence and indifference. Indifference to all things, and yet not by the absence of sympathy. And independence in regard to all things, and yet not independence in the crude sense of the word. Renunciation, therefore, may be called the final victory. Only 1 in a million can attain to this ideal. And the one who has attained this ideal is he who may be called elevated, liberated. Purity of life. Purity of life is the central theme of all the religions which have been given through the ages to humanity. For purity is not only a religious idea, but it is the outcome of the nature of life itself, and one sees it in some form or other in every living creature. It is the tendency of all animals and birds to cleanse their coats or feathers, and to find a clean place in which to live or sit, and in the human being this tendency is even more pronounced. Even a man who has not risen above the material life shows this faculty in physical cleanliness, but behind this there is something else hidden, something which is the secret of the whole creation, and the reason why the world was made. Purity is the process through which the life rhythm manifests, the rhythm of that indwelling spirit which has worked through the ages in mineral and plant, in animal and man. For its effort, through all these experiences, is to arrive at that realization where it finds itself pure, pure in essence, and pure from all that could affect its original condition. The entire process of creation and of spiritual unfoldment shows that the spirit which is life itself, and which represents the divine in life, has wrapped itself in numberless folds, and in that way has, so to speak, descended from heaven to earth. This process is called involution, and that which follows is known as evolution, or the unwrapping of the divine essence from the folds of enshrouding matter. The sense of this need of freeing the spirit from that which clogs and binds it is called purity, in whatever part of life it is felt. It is in this sense that we may understand the saying cleanliness is next to godliness. In the Arabic language, the word for purity is saf, from which root the name Sufi is derived. Some of the early orders of Sufis were called the Brothers or the Knights of Purity, and this did not allude to physical purity, but to the unfoldment of the spirit towards its original condition, the pure being of the metaphysician, or the pure reason of the philosopher. The word Sophia or pure wisdom has the same derivation. In the ordinary use of the word pure, we find the same meaning. For instance, when we speak of pure water or pure milk, we mean that the original substance is unmixed with any foreign element. Therefore, a pure life is the term used to express the effort of man to keep his spiritual being untainted by the false values of the worldly life. It is the constant search for the original self, the desire to reach it, and the means employed to recover it, which alone can truly be called purity of life. But the term can be applied with the same meaning to any part of man's life. When it refers to the body, it expresses the idea that what is foreign to the body should not be there, and this is the first stage of purity. When a person is spoken of as pure-minded, does it not mean that only that which is natural to the mind remains there, and that all which is unnatural has been washed away? This leads us to the question as to what is natural to the mind, and for an answer we cannot do better than to take the mind of a little child. What do we find there? We find first of all faith, the natural tendency to trust, then love, the natural tendency towards friendliness and affection, then hope, the natural expectancy of joy and happiness. No child is a natural unbeliever. If it were so, it could not learn anything. What it hears and what it is told is accepted by the mind, which is ready to believe, admire, and trust. It is experience of life. The life of the world where selfishness reigns, that spoils the beauty of the mind of the child who is a natural believer. A natural friend, ready to smile at every face, a natural admirer of beauty, ready to see without criticism and to overlook all that does not attract it, a natural lover who knows no hate. There are two ways of becoming pure in mind and body. The one way is to live so that the divine nature in us may shine out and illuminate our path, and so that everything we do and refrain from doing may result in a pure life. The other way is very simple and yet very difficult. It is to observe a child, to envy its innocence, simplicity, and purity, and to grow like a child, following first the example of a child of 9 years, then of 8 years, then of 7, and so on. As one goes further, one comes to taking even an infant as one's example. It was this secret which was taught by the pictures of the Holy Mother with the infant Christ. Also the symbolical meaning of the wise men of the East, coming to pay homage to the infant Christ, is that to learn the truth, we must unlearn all the truths we have learned. To bring back that higher stage of innocence which existed in the Garden of Eden, we do not need to lose intellect, we need to rise above it. As long as man is beneath his intellect, he is the slave of his intellect, but when he is above it, he is its master. Man is greater than the angels, therefore the world can be a higher place than the Garden of Eden. If only man has mastery over his intellect, if only he can rise above it, instead of sinking beneath it. When the soul is evolved, it feels by itself. In other words, it becomes conscious of its purity, of its majesty, of its eternal life, of its bliss, of its inspiration and of its power. Such is the original mind of man and such its natural condition. It is not sin that is original but purity, the original purity of God Himself. But as the mind grows and is fed by the life in the world, unnatural things are added to it, and for the moment these additions seem desirable, useful, or beautiful. They build another kind of mind which is sometimes called the ego or the false self. They make man clever, learned, brilliant, and many other things. But above and beyond all is the man of whom it can be said that he is pure-minded. When we think about this, there arises the question as to whether it would then be desirable to keep a child always a child, so that it should never learn the things which belong to the worldly life. But one might just as well ask if it is not desirable that the spirit should always remain in heaven and never come to earth at all. True exaltation of the spirit resides in the fact that it has come to earth and has realized there its spiritual existence. It is this which is the perfection of spirit. Therefore, all that the world gives, in the way of knowledge, of experience, or of reason, all that a man's own experience or that of others teaches, all that is learnt from life, its sorrows and disappointments, its joys and opportunities, all these contradictory experiences, help our love to become fuller and our vision wider. A man who has gone through all experiences and has held his spirit high and has not allowed it to be stained, such a man may be said to be pure-minded. The person who could be called pure because he had no knowledge of either good or evil would in reality be merely a simpleton. To go through all which takes away the original purity and yet to rise above everything which seeks to overwhelm it and drag it down, that is spirituality. The light of the spirit held high and burning clear and pure. It needs the effort of a whole lifetime, and he who has not known it has not known life. The first kind of purity is the purity of the physical world in which man has to obey the laws of cleanliness and of hygiene. And in doing so he takes the first step towards spirituality. The next is what is generally called purity of life, that purity of life which is shown in a man's social, moral, and religious attitude. The national and religious codes are often very rigid with regard to this kind of purity, and sometimes it is merely an external, man-made purity, which the individual soul has to break through to find that of a higher plane. There is, however, a standard of inner purity of which the principle is that anything in speech or action which causes fear, brings confusion, or gives a tendency to deception, extinguishes that little spark in the heart, the spark of trueness which only shines when the life is natural and pure. A man may not always be able to tell when an action is right in regard to particular circumstances, or when it is wrong. But he can always remember this psychological principle and judge as to whether the action or word robs him of that inner strength and peace and comfort which form his natural life. No man can judge another, it is a man's self that must be his judge. Therefore it is no use to make rigid standards of moral or social purity. Religion has made them, schools have taught them, yet the prisons are full of criminals, and the newspapers are daily more eloquent about the faults of humanity. No external law can stop crime. It is man himself who should understand what is good for him and what is not. He should be able to discriminate between what is poison and what is nectar. He should know it, measure it, weigh it and judge it, and that he can only do by understanding the psychology of what is natural to him and what is unnatural. The unnatural action, thought, or speech is that which makes him uncomfortable before, during, or after it has taken place. For his sense of discomfort is proof that in this case it is not the soul which is the actor. The soul is forever seeking something which will open a way for its expression and give it freedom and comfort in this physical life. In reality, the whole life is tending towards freedom, towards the unfoldment of something which is choked up by physical life, and this freedom can be gained by true purity of life. We have seen what it means to purify the life of the body and of the mind. But there is a further purity, which is the purity of the heart, the constant effort to keep the heart pure from all the impressions which come from without and are foreign to the true nature of the heart, which is love. And this can only be done by a continual watchfulness over one's attitude towards others, by overlooking their faults, by forgiving their shortcomings, by judging no one except oneself. For all harsh judgments and bitterness towards others are like poison. To feel them is exactly the same as absorbing poison in the blood. The result must be disease. First, disease in the inner life only, but in time the disease breaks out in the physical life, and these are illnesses which cannot be cured. External cleanliness does not have much effect upon the inner purity, but inner uncleanness causes disease both inwardly and outwardly. Then, after this third stage has been reached, and the heart has been attuned by high ideals, by good thoughts, by righteous actions, there comes a still greater purity, in which all that is seen or felt, all that is touched or admired, is perceived as God. At this stage, no thought or feeling may be allowed to come into the heart, but God alone. In the picture of the artist, this heart sees God. In the merit of the artist which observes nature, in the faculty of the artist to reproduce that which he observes, such a one sees the perfection of God, and therefore to him God becomes all and all becomes God. When this purity is reached, man lives in virtue. Virtue is not a thing which he expresses or experiences from time to time. His life itself is virtue. Every moment that God is absent from the consciousness is considered by the sage to be a sin, for at that moment the purity of the heart is poisoned. It is lack of life which is sin, and it is purity of life which is virtue. It is of this purity that Jesus Christ spoke when he said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Ideal. If anyone asked me what is the life of life, and what is the light of life, what gives one interest in life, I should answer him in one word, and that is the ideal. A man with wealth, with qualifications, with learning, with comfort, but without ideal to me is a corpse. But a man without learning, without qualifications, without wealth or rank, but with an ideal is a living man. If a man does not live for an ideal, what else does he live for? He lives for himself, which is nothing. The man who lives and does not know an ideal is powerless and without light. The greater the ideal, the greater the person. The wider the ideal, the broader the person. The deeper the ideal, the deeper the person. The higher the ideal, the higher the person. Without an ideal, whatever a man may be in life, life for him is worthless. What do I mean by an ideal? However insignificant the object may be which one loves, which one looks up to, for which one is ready to sacrifice oneself and all one possesses, yet that is an ideal. I prefer the fanatic who says, "For this idol of stone I will give my life." I worship it as a god, to the one who says, "I do not know, I just live on from day to day." A sincere ideal, however slight, is an ideal. Even to have a slight ideal, and yet to understand it and to be sincere about it, is something worthwhile. We do not reach the ideal when we go from one ideal to another. There is an old story of Harishchandra, a king, whose principle was to be faithful, to be truthful, to be true to his word. At one time, having been taken prisoner, he was sold into the house of a person who made him a keeper of the graveyard. And one day he saw his wife coming there, from whom he had been separated many years. His wife was bringing his son who had died to be buried there. A great struggle went on in his mind when he saw that it was his own child and his own wife, whom he had not seen for so many years. She was so poor that she could not pay the money that was needed for the burial, and here he was appointed by his master to ask money for the work he had to do. But though he recognized his wife, he never said, "I am your husband." He recognized his child, but never allowed his heart to show his deep sadness. He did not allow her to enter without paying, for he was appointed for that purpose. He went through a sorrow which was worse than death. Yet he kept to his principle. The ideal will always appeal to one, however fanatical it may seem, however unreasonable, however it may seem to lack logic, yet an ideal is an ideal. It has a life of its own. An ideal is living, and it makes the one who is an idealist alive. There may be someone who will go through any sacrifice to serve his nation. He has his ideal. There is another who, in order to keep up the dignity of his family, of his ancestors, will endure troubles and difficulties, and yet will keep his honor. He has some ideal. However narrow he may seem to be, however conservative, yet he has a virtue which should be recognized. The records of the world's history show that those who have been able to maintain their virtue have very often been able to do so because their parents or their ancestors had maintained their dignity, therefore they could not do otherwise. A person who does not consider these things will go on living and may even have a profitable life, but it will be an ordinary life, a life without depth, without value. There is nothing in life which can make it worthwhile except an ideal. There are others who have a racial ideal. They value certain qualities of their race and maintain them, and in order to maintain them they are willing to go through any sacrifice. There are others who have the honor of their word. Once they have given their word, it is forever. There are other idealists who have the honor of their affection, the honor of their love, the honor of their friendship. Once they have given it, it is given. To go back upon it is the greatest disgrace to them. Both in giving their heart and in accepting a heart there is character, there is honor. The loss of that stability is worse to them than death. All these things, however small and childish they may appear, have great value. They are really the only things worthwhile in life. The following story is an example of an extreme ideal. Once in the Punjab, some little girls were playing together when Maharaja Ranjit Singh passed by. He was taking a walk, disguised as an ordinary man. One little girl said, "I am going to marry a millionaire." Another little girl said, "I am going to marry a general." Then a third little girl, who was a Rajput, a caste which is known for its pride and chivalry, said, "I am going to marry the king of this place, the Maharaja." Ranjit Singh, who was old enough to be her grandfather, overheard this and was greatly amused. He told the parents of that girl that when the time of her wedding came they should apply to him, and then a dowry would be given to her by the state, so that she could be happy all her life. Years passed and the king died, and the time came for the parents to think about arranging their daughter's marriage. When the question was put to the girl, she said, "How can it be? I have been married already. Did I not give my word? Is it not enough?" They said, "It was a word given in your childhood, it meant nothing at all. It was play, and the Maharaja is now dead." She said, "No, I will not hear another word about it. I am the daughter of a Rajput, I have given my word, and I will not go back on it." This is an extreme ideal. It has a fanatical aspect, but nevertheless it is an ideal. There is another story of a Rajput Raja, a man with a fine nature and high ideal, and who was also very fond of poetry. He waged war against the Mughal Emperor of Delhi, and the struggle continued for a long time. While the war was going on, other princes gave in and came to the emperor's court and did homage, but that one Raja said that as long as he lived he would never bow to the emperor. And at last, when the emperor became disheartened after a long battle, he told the warriors of his court that there would be a very large prize for the one who would bring him the head of this Raja, who had caused such great trouble and expense. No one seemed to want to undertake this task except one man, a great poet at the court of the emperor. All the brave warriors laughed at him, but the poet went to the camp of the Raja, and his great talent made such an impression upon the Raja that he said, "Ask, O poet, for I really do not know what to give you. There seems to be nothing worthy of you in the treasury." "No," he said, "do not promise what will be difficult for you to keep." He replied, "My promise is a promise." The poet then said, "I feel very embarrassed at asking you, but it is your head I want. Will you keep your promise?" The Raja at once unsheathed his sword and put it in the hand of the poet and said, "It is a very small thing you have asked, it is not greater than my word." The people, his children, the ministers, were all very upset, but he was not upset at all. Then the poet said, "As you have promised me your head, why not give me your body also? Why should not this body also come with me?" The Raja agreed and left with the poet first and the Raja behind him, and thus he was brought alive to the camp of the emperor. And there was great excitement, and in order to satisfy his vanity, the emperor asked the Raja to come into the court where all the nobles were gathered. After the poet had brought the Raja into the court, the emperor looked at him, at that enemy with whom he had been at war for so many years, and he said, "You have come after all, after so many years, but it does not seem that your pride is gone, for you do not think even now of bowing before me." The Raja answered, "Who should bow? A dead person?" No doubt that iron-hearted emperor did not see the beauty of that soul, for he ordered that he should be beheaded. But the poet exclaimed, "No, if he is to be killed, then I must be killed first. I must be beheaded also, for I shall never find anyone who will appreciate my music as he has." So this poet died together with the Raja. And the sons of the poet, his whole family, all came and recited the most wonderful and inspiring poems, which were just like the salt of the earth. Each one said one poem and died, for the merit of that Raja and the great wisdom he had shown. Everyone must die one day or other. The Raja died because he would not break his word. If the earth were above and the sky below, he would keep it just the same. In the history of nations one finds a great many examples of idealism like these. One might say that these people lack wisdom, that they lack balance, reason, logic, and yet they stand above logic and reason. They stand above what one calls practicality and common sense. Many practical people with common sense have come and gone. But if we remember the names of any who have made a lasting impression upon the world, they are the idealists. It is very difficult to distinguish between a false and a true ideal. It is not only difficult, but it is impossible. For if something is false, then it is as false as it is real. And if it is real, it is as real as it is false. The best way is just to take as true that which at the time appears true to us. But we should not always discuss it with others, nor try to defend it. We do not know. We do not know if what we find true today will not appear false to us tomorrow. For all these terms, good or bad, right or wrong, virtue or sin, false or true are relative. And according to differences of time and space they change, which means that it depends from what height we look at it, from what position we see it. In other words, what seems right in the morning may seem wrong in the evening, and what may seem wrong in the day may seem right at night. Another example is that if we stand on a certain step of a staircase when looking at things, the right things will seem wrong by looking at them from another step. And the wrong things will seem right by looking at them from a higher or lower one. Therefore, whatever we consider at the time to be right, just, good, and virtuous, that is the thing we ought to do. But we should not impose or urge what we consider right or good or true upon others who do not consider it in the same way as we do. The ideal is such that one can go to extremes, but as they say in Sanskrit, extremes in all things are undesirable. Yet at the same time it is not generally so. Mostly one does not consider the ideal enough. For instance, one cannot be too good, and one cannot be too true. The way to practice this is in one's everyday life. If one would only keep in mind that what one has said one must do, even if it is a very small thing. This whole question is very delicate, because it is said that in the beginning was the Word. So breaking one's word is breaking God. If man begins to realize, in my word there is God, then he will keep his word. Some wonder if it is better to keep one's word, even if one finds later one was mistaken in giving it. This depends upon one's discernment. Keeping one's word is like a promise. Besides this, a person may speak without thought, and later he will have to change. But if he will always try to speak without mistakes, then in time he will be able to avoid mistakes. To say, a promise is a promise might seem somewhat rigid, but it is not, for a promise is one's word, one's honor, one's ideal. As high as one's ideal is, so important is one's promise. If one's word can be kicked about like a football, it is nothing. One's word is like a pearl mounted on the crown of a king. There are men with such high ideals that once their word is broken, they do not wish to live. There is something very high, very wonderful, in this, for it is the divine spark within which gives one the sense of the word. If there is anything by which one can test a person, what he is, his personality, his greatness, his goodness, it is by his word. No doubt the ideal by which we all feel that we come from the same source and return to the same source is the greatest. For in that ideal we unite with one another, serve one another, and feel responsible for being sincere and true to one another. Even if a man has learned some virtues, he cannot very well practice those virtues if he has no ideal. Ideal teaches virtues naturally, they rise from the heart of man. There is a story of a king who judged 4 persons for the same misdemeanor. The wise king said to one that he must be exiled, to the other that he would be put in prison for some time, to the third that he should have a life sentence, and to the fourth he said, I am surprised. I never expected that such an offense would be committed by you. And what was the result? The one who was sent to prison was quite happy with his comrades there. The one who was exiled built up his business outside the country. The one who was sentenced, and that was that. But the fourth one went home and committed suicide. It is the ideal which prompts man to sacrifice, and the most important thing he can sacrifice is his own life. A man without ideal has no depth, he is shallow. However pleased he may be with his everyday life, he can never enjoy that happiness which is independent of outer circumstances. The pleasure which is experienced through pain is the pleasure experienced by the idealist. But what of the pleasure that does not come out of pain? It is tasteless. Life's gain, which people think so much of, what is it after all? A loss caused by an ideal is a greater gain than any other gain in this world. The true ideal is always hidden behind a man-made ideal, which covers it. For instance, the fragrance is hidden in the petals of the rose, and when one wants to extract the spirit from them, one has to crush them. But thereby the same rose that could have lasted for only a few days has been turned into spirit, into essence, which can last a whole lifetime. That is what is meant by the saying from the Gaian. The ideal is a means, but its breaking is the goal. The ideal can also be pictured as an egg. Its breaking is the fulfillment, as with the egg when the chick comes forth. It is necessary for the ideal to break. If it is not broken, then the ideal is not used. The ideal recedes when one approaches it, but the keener one's sight becomes, the greater becomes the beauty of the ideal. In this way one is not removed further from the ideal, one is brought closer to it. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.